We need to talk today about the idea of contrast, which is also oftentimes called emphasis and subordination, or emphasis and dominance in a drawing. Basically, the idea is that emphasis or dominance would be drawing attention to something, as opposed to subordination, which would be drawing attention away from something, subordinating one thing so that something else jumps out. So you'll see in this image here I have at the bottom of the screen, you have this red umbrella and a sea of gray umbrellas, and the gray umbrellas are de-emphasized and the red umbrella is therefore emphasized. The gray ones, because of like the Gestalt principle of similarity, they're all, obviously the shapes of them are all pretty similar between the red and the gray, but then the gray share the color, and so the red one stands out just by dint of being different. Also, the red is a pretty intense bright color, so that's going to catch our attention. So we're just going to go through a number of images that talk about this idea of contrast and show different types of contrasts. What I mean by contrast is the juxtaposition of dissimilar elements. Juxtaposition is just fancy art word for putting two things next to each other in a way that's going to make you pay attention to them, pay attention to the relationship between them. So this is just putting things that are on opposite end of any visual spectrum next to each other, and that will get you to pay attention to the difference between them. This image painting, A Bigger Splash by David Hockney, has a lot of different contrasts in them, a lot of the ones we're going to look at again as we move through this lecture. So I'll just point out some of them. We have these big areas of like flat shapes, rectangles, geometric shapes, put right up against these small areas of organic shapes with the trees and the plants. You have very dark values against very light values. You have a lot of cool colors against warm colors, so the blue against the orange. You have very flat application of paint versus very like scratchy, splashy application of paint. So anything like that would count as contrast. There's a number of other contrasts in here. Big, thick shapes versus thin little shapes, and the rhythm of that repetition over there. So we're just going to go look at a series of these now. Ways that you can draw attention away from stuff. So when something's in and out of focus, like we have this painting by Marilyn Minter, and you see that the level of detail up here in the lip, all the water on the lip, the teeth is very in focus and everything is out of focus. So our attention is going to be drawn to that high focus area because that's where we're getting more information. She also has a good strong light versus dark. So there's really bright brights here versus really dark darks here. Here we have Vasily Kandinsky composition number 7. He's doing a lot of play with line and shape. So you'll see that there's a lot of areas out here where he's working with this idea of area first shape that we've talked about before. And then in this area here, there's a lot more emphasis on the line first. There's a lot of black mark making, and it's like checkerboard hashtag symbols and things like that. That's very much more line based. It's not saying that he's not using linear elements elsewhere in the composition. It's just that this chunk of the composition here is much more about shape and color. This area of the composition here is much more about line. And so there's a balance between those two. In this one, I would say also that there's like a all over sense of focus. There's not a huge focal point. So the emphasis and subordination is much more sophisticated in here. There's little areas of emphasis and subordination, and you kind of bounce between them in a more musical manner. There's not like one central image. So don't get confused that you always have to just have like one area that is the emphasized area. Scale and size is something else. So the larger something is, probably the more emphasized it's going to be, and it also just contrasts against the smaller thing here. Something else that this image does really well is it shows that recognizable symbols and icons such as letters and numbers are going to tend to dominate your attention. These symbols and icons are purposely designed to be immediately recognizable and to immediately set off the meaning recognizing part of your brain. So when you see a number 5, it's like it downloads that concept into your head right away. When you see letters and things, especially, this is a pretty flat and graphic image already, very designed looking. But if you stuck a big number 5 in the middle of otherwise, realistic landscape scene or something, it would just be so different. Icons are so different from realistic looking things that they tend to stand out. Probably for most students, the most important thing to think about with this idea that numbers and letters are going to capture a lot of attention is when you're signing artwork, your signature is on the picture plane. It's part of the composition. It's not just well, here's the picture and I sign my name on top of it. It is an element within the design that is going to catch attention. It's probably going to catch a lot of attention because you'll have a picture and then all of a sudden there's symbols, icons there. And it's probably going to weight your picture down, usually towards the bottom right corner where people put it. So I would be careful about that. Be careful about how you use things like lettering in images. This one does it very successfully because it's more about shape and abstract letter. Here we see Piet Mondrian's composition 2 in red, blue, and yellow. You'll see that intensity of color dominates and also size dominates in this one. So you have a large area of red. Now, red, blue, and yellow, as he has them on here, are all pretty pure colors. They're all pretty intense, but that red is by far the most vibrant color on the image, and so it really just dominates our attention. Plus, it's bigger. It takes up way more space. So, again, it's got this scale thing that we saw in the last image. Now, here we're going to go ahead and look at an intense color dominating a dull color where we've got a big area of this bright red dominating a neutral color here. This is obvious. It's going to dominate the image. But we will pay a fair amount of attention to this desaturated color here because it's an aberration. So in a field of the bright red, this will, I don't want to say dominate, but it will catch your attention. I think the red is still a very dominant element. It overwhelms it. But we can shift that relationship a little bit by having something be aberration. Now, if we flip that and we have a neutral field and then a small aberrant area of red, then it's really going to catch our attention because it's different than everything else and it's dominant. So depending on the context that you put these things in, your perception of the amount of dominance and how much attention it will carry will shift. So like anything else that we're exploring in these classes, context changes how you perceive any of these qualities that we're talking about. Another one is warm versus cool. So here you'll see a largely warm image. Most of the colors are in the reds, oranges, yellows type of warms. I know we haven't talked about color yet, but that's a way that we describe color. Has to do with how warm it feels. And then you have blue, which is cool. And so just, because it's different, again, it stands out. And then you also have, we're looking at Girl with a Pearl Earring by Johannes Vermeer. He uses very dark background against a very bright foreground. So that's another type of contrast that he's using to really make this image striking. So here we'll look at warm versus cool. I went ahead and desaturated the colors, which means they're not as intense, and I tried to keep them at about the same value, so we're not looking at a light versus dark contrast here. So you'll see that this cooler neutral color here stands out against all of these warms, so it catches attention, draws attention to itself by being different. If I flip that, just take those same two colors and flip them, you'll see how much more dominant this one is in the space though. Like this one is aberrant, it stands out, but it's not quite as dominant as this. So again, those warms will tend to dominate an image. Like they do more work here. And then here where the bluish color is doing less work, the reddish color is even more intense. And it looks also more reddish. It's not quite as brownish looking. Same thing with black and white. Like in a large field of white, black's going to be pretty dominant. And then this isn't all the way black either. This is like a 10% white and a 90% gray. So we're not at total black and white. And then you'll see if we flip that, you'll get a sense of how much lighter that gray actually is. You'll see that the white is still dominating. It's very dominating in this image, this light gray. This stands out by being an aberration. But here, the lighter color is dominant. So the lights tend to be dominant. Again, it's relative to context. Complexity, texture, pattern, anything like that where you have a lot of stuff versus simple, smooth, and unified is another good way to get contrast. Here in this Miriam Shapiro, you'll see that Heartland from 1985. You have all kinds of pattern going on, a lot of the texture and these flower things, all kinds of just little details and clutter everywhere. And then this very flat, simple black in the middle just really stands out in this field of chaos. But all of this being so colorful and patterned does stand out. I would say it's more dominant, but this is also helping create a focal point by being aberrant, by being different on the other end of these spectrums. So we'll look at that as well. Here we'll have, this noise screen that I keep showing you and a field of simplicity. So we have unity here and total variety out here. You'll see that the variety is pretty dominating overall, but this being an aberration stands out. And again, we'll go ahead and flip that, and then you'll see how dominant really the variety is, and that this area becomes really interesting, and we're just not interested in this area at all. With the idea of shape, rectilinear versus curvilinear shape, that's another opposite end of a spectrum. So you'll see this painting by Charles Sheeler here has a lot of rectilinear elements, a lot of straight lines, and then these very few elements that are curvilinear pipe here, the sense that it's a cylinder here, these couple round windows. Those create these little pops of interest within all of the rectilinear design, so they very much stand out. Change in direction can also be something that's going to emphasize one thing against others. So here we just have all these horizontal lines, and obviously this vertical line is going to stand out as being different. You'll see this as well in The Steerage by Alfred Stieglitz, where he's mostly got these vertical motions going up and down. All the people create verticals. The pipe here, or I don't know if that's a pipe or it's just a big beam, but you have a large vertical here. You've got a number of fairly horizontal lines going this way, and then he cuts one strong diagonal across that. So that diagonal just really is aberrant, catches a lot of attention. It also splits the image into a couple different pieces there, and it's an important part of this composition because of it. Isolation, if we go back to the idea of Gestalt principles and grouping, you'll see in this painting, The Agnew Clinic by Thomas Akins, that there's a group over here, then there's a huge group here, and the two groups are defined by them being very dark and them being very light. So there's a difference between light and dark groupings. But then within the light grouping, you have this fellow here who's removed from the group by space. He's not part of the cluster of the shape over here. And so he becomes a very strong figure in the composition, a very strong focal point, even though there is a lot of psychic attention going on to the fact of the surgery over here that everyone's watching. The weight of this character off to the left because of the isolation from everything else also makes him strong and dominating. You get also, these light versus dark contrasts and other ones. So it's very rare that you're getting any of these things used in isolation. It's how you put them all together. Focal point. This is usually, with all of this emphasis and subordination, you're trying to create a strong focal point. Like in this image, we pay a lot of attention to this figure. The thing that anchors down the whole image. So here we have an Emil Nold painting, The Last Supper. Now if we're going to have a painting of Jesus better well be the focal point of the thing. And that's what this artist has done. So you have all of these triangular shapes, all of this psychic attention focusing you on Jesus. And then you also have a pretty overall warm composition. And then you have this area here with all of these cools that focuses you right in the middle as well. So that's the important thing. And you get that, we'll go back to Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. Same thing, another painting of Jesus. Obviously, Jesus should be the focal point. And we already talked about all the directional lines, all of the psychic attention. You also get this color contrast here. There's other blues and reds, but right on Jesus, you get blue and red right against each other. So very intense colors in the middle, and then a high contrast between a cool and a warm color, the two intense colors vibrating, the darkness of his hair against the lightness of the window behind it. There's a lot of stuff going on in here to make Jesus the focal point of this piece. And then you have some paintings, you have some images that don't have any of this, that don't have a strong focal point, that don't have the types of underlying shapes that we've been talking about throughout the semester. These are called just overall compositions. And that would be someone like Jackson Pollock. He's creating these images that don't really have any one area that's emphasized or any one area that's subordinated. You'll get these like little pops of these golden yellowy colors here that maybe stand out from everything else. But they're so evenly distributed all over the canvas, there's no sense of focal point. And that's fine. There are a lot of artists who use these type of all-over compositions because it's more like a world that you can get lost in than a picture like, well, wait, this is a picture of Jesus and we all better be paying attention to Jesus, and that's what it's about. Someone like Jackson Pollock will maybe give your mind a little bit more room